as a leader,
Yes.
if you're trying to implement change, or as an individual contributor, if you're trying to adopt the change, just understanding the process of what does the change look like? What am I expecting? What am I going to be expected to do? Will they teach me how to do it? How am I going to learn how this process works? And what does
Right.
success look like? Right. So
Yeah.
that is, for those with learner or just kind of that more process oriented, that can be super helpful with embracing change and really, adopting change in the workplace for sure.
Hi, and welcome to the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
This season, we're welcoming fellow coaches back to the show to explore how people can move beyond naming and claiming their talents to start to aim their talents. We're calling this season Strengths Applied. And today, our topic is embracing change. I'm super excited to introduce you to a new guest to our show, Sally Magee. Sally is coming to us from Palm Springs, California, so she's going to heat it up for us today. She is the owner of her coaching business, which is Magee Leadership Solutions. She is a master facilitator, a leadership and sobriety coach, which is super fun. We're going to leave her information so you can get in contact with Sally in the show notes for this episode. Super excited to have her here because Chad, she shares some of our top 5. So Sally's top 5 are learner, achiever, responsibility, input, and futuristic. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so great. I love it.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so building on Jen's quick comment about our themes, I love that you and I share learner at number 1 and responsibility at number 3. I know you share achiever with Jen, but
Yep, at number 2.
You perfectly
Yeah.
matched up there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so it's
Oh,
even in the
that's
right
so
it's even in the
funny.
right spot. Yeah, my responsibility is 1. So we have those 2 in common. That futuristic of yours, yeah, that's down at the bottom for me. That's 33.
Oh, wow. Okay, nice.
So fun. Well, so I'm sure we're going to get into how these themes help us embrace change. But before we dive into that, I wanted to kind of level set us with the why for today. Chad, I think you and I grabbed this topic when we were listing out our topics of this embracing change really early in our planning for the podcast of this season. And because I think we knew this was one of those really important topics that we needed to tackle, but we never had extra conversation about what we were going to talk about with this theme, with this topic. So I'm super excited. Personally, I think we're talking about this today because change is really hard. Even when it's good change, it's hard. And navigating workplace changes or leading change efforts, it's, I think, even more difficult because everybody responds differently to change. I'm hoping this conversation can help give those who are facing changes some permission to ask questions and get clarity, whether you're dealing with a personal change, an organizational one. Change is hard, and we know this. It's hard to embrace because of all the unknowns. Chad, I'm betting there's lots of statistics you can bring to this about change. What do you have for us?
Yeah. So there's a very common one that is cited from a lot of different organizations. Best I could assess, it actually does come from Gallup, which says that 70% of corporate change initiatives fail. So that's at an organizational level. There's some similar research from the Gartner organization that says only 34% of organizational change initiatives are considered a clear success, and an additional 50% are considered clear failures. So it somewhat matches up with the
Wow,
Gallup stat.
yeah, it sure does.
So
Wow.
there's also some information around the fact that only 13% of U.S. employees believe their leaders communicate effectively. And this comes into something that I think we're going to talk about a little bit later in the episode about how change is communicated. And if
Yes.
you have only a very small percentage of your leaders communicating effectively or being perceived as communicating effectively, you're going to have some challenges. And that, I think, goes back to your point of the uncertainty, the unclearness of a lot of change initiatives.
Yeah.
So that's a starting point about why this is important, why it's key to get it right. Because if you want to expand that percentage of getting change initiatives correct, you're going to need to think about change a little differently, and that's why we're here. Sally, my understanding from reading up on your wonderful profile, because Jen beautifully brought you to our show. You have a lot of experience with personal change through your sobriety coaching, but you also do some leadership coaching. So just kind of curious, where did you start with this whole embracing change idea?
Well, yeah, I'll start on the personal side, and then we can kind of follow up on maybe the workplace change types of initiatives. But from
Sure.
I am a sobriety coach, and that means I am sober. So, about 4 years ago, I really embraced change, I changed my relationship with alcohol. I was what's considered a gray area drinker, if you're familiar with that term.
Hmm.
It's the space between every now and then drinking, which is like maybe a couple drinks a year, and rock bottom drinking. So
Mm.
there's a wide spectrum in terms of alcoholism and people's use of alcohol. And I was in that gray area. So it was, a couple drinks a night. I was a daily drinker. And I really, the change was really difficult. Um, but I really needed to learn a lot around, personal habits and habit change. And we can get into kind of how my strengths played into that journey. But from a personal standpoint, my kind of biggest experience with embracing change was really around changing my relationship with alcohol, which I did about
Hmm.
4 years ago.
Yeah, wow.
Okay. And then you said
Such a hard place.
yeah. And then you
Those
said you've also
habits.
done some stuff, or sorry, started to talk about leadership change or organizational change you've also had some experience with.
Yeah, gosh, where do I start there? As a leadership coach, I actually coach clients who are going through workplace changes. I use a framework known as ADKAR, and I don't know if you're familiar
Oh.
with the ADKAR change management process. It's by ProSci. It's a step-by-step process that um, organizations can use when they want to change behavior of their employees. It looks like Jen, you're familiar with this, and Chad
A
maybe
little
not,
bit,
but
yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
just kind of throw this out there, walk you through the model just really quickly, and then we can kind of take it from there. But
yeah.
ADKAR is it's sequential and cumulative, and it starts with awareness. So that's the first A in ADKAR. It starts with awareness of the reason for change. Um, for employees to embrace change, they need to have desires. They need to want to
Mm.
change. So you, as managers or leaders, you need to build in that desire of your employees and get them to want to change. A lot of people, like Jen, like you said, are change is hard. So a lot of people are resistant to change. So we need to teach them the knowledge of what the change looks like. That's the K. And then the second A in ADKAR is the ability. So they need to be able to demonstrate the ability to do the new work process or behavior change, whatever that ability is, whatever the change looks like. And then the last piece, which is super important, is reinforcement. So in order for the change to stick and to be sustainable within an organization, it needs to be reinforced. So that's where your managers and your leaders come in, is really helping employees understand, the reason for change, helping them adopt the change, teaching them how to do it, and then reinforcing the good behavior that they once they're able to demonstrate that change.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad you used that process. I did something similar. So like you, I'm going to share two stories too. A personal experience with change as well as some organizational change. In my past role, I was actually responsible to lead a group through some pretty massive workplace change. But this wasn't like changing people. This was changing place. So it was all these employees, and for one specific example, it was all these employees were across 4 different locations. They each had their own private office. This is like 200 plus employees, all had their own private office. And they decided it made more sense to bring all of these people together under the same roof. It meant 12 now would get private offices, and the rest would all be open plan. And while they liked the idea of being next to another group so they could communicate and collaborate better, they hated the idea of losing the private office. So the biggest challenge that they faced in this was really the people's reactions to it. Change really typically means the loss of something, right? It's that, like, we know we're losing something. Even if we're losing something that was bad for us, it still like brings up all these emotions. And so it was really their reactions to that really like caused the bigger problem. So most of my role was helping people to understand what the change was, and then working through like giving them the clarity that they needed so that they could embrace this change for what it was, deal with the hard parts of it, and then like embrace the positives that were coming their way. It means, of course, a ton of communication, which I thought was like maybe the best part about that, is because it forced people to communicate a lot more often and a lot more, indirectly, and instead of some of these like, oh, well, we told them that one time, 3 months ago, and then no one says another word. And then we're like, maybe this isn't happening.
Right.
Oh, no, it's coming. Get ready. Yeah. So, and then I think for me personally, I want, and this probably goes into my talents, which we'll talk about in the next question, but I really want, when things are going to change for me, I want everything to change. I'm talking full overhaul. So in the past, when I've changed jobs, it didn't just mean I was changing a job. I was also moving to a different state, different company, different type of job, like complete upheaval. And I don't know if I purposely like looked for those opportunities that meant I had to move to a different state. But when this stuff happened, everything changed at once. I guess I'm like, well, if we're going to shake it up, we might as well shake it all up, right? So, Chad, I would love to hear your personal experiences with that.
Yeah,
or professional with change.
Yeah, so I think the two most notable changes for me are when I made the transition. The first one was making the transition from a fairly distant location back to being closer to family. I realized that making the change, going the other direction, taking the job, that was big. And maybe there were some things I didn't quite think through in terms of what the ramifications were going to be. But it was a good experiment, and it pushed me to grow. I think that's one of the things that we can take out of any changes. We mentioned at the top of the show that learner, I'm always interested to try and figure out something new or make things work. And so that was a change that has impacted sort of how I see this topic. I think the other big change was going from my higher ed background. So I was an admissions counselor, and then I did a lot of alumni and development fundraising work. But then I went independent. I left higher education and became an independent coach. And boy, what a change from going from working within a team where you had different people. We talk about this when we coach on teams. Each person has their role and their specialties and their own talents, and you can bounce off of that. And when I went solo, I think it was good for a lot of my talents, but I also realized that all of a sudden I was now going to need to tap into a lot more of my talent themes or figure out different ways to mimic the abilities of some of my colleagues. And so I think that was a big change I had to embrace. I went looking for it, but it also, you don't know what you don't know until you're on the other side of it, right? Just right. Probably like, making the changes to sobriety and changing workplaces. You don't know what's on the other side until you actually get there. So I think that was one big place. And we can talk about where my talents helped and hindered in that. But that was probably the biggest change in terms of a professional life, of going from a team operation to going solo. And I think this is also a place where it's been really great to connect with other coaches. Jen and I, you and I have done a lot of work, and I've been able to lean on your talents a little bit. But you're not here, day in and day out working with
Right.
me. And, same thing with Sally. Sally's not in my office. She's out in California doing her thing. So it's just a matter of figuring out how you make that work and making that switch. So yeah, so I think that those are sort of the two big points in my life where I had to embrace it. Both were somewhat self-imposed,
Yeah.
but still meaningful. So
Yeah. Oh, and I love that you already started to like tap into your learner and how some of that works. So I want to take us right there to talk about these talents that we have, because I think even hearing our story and how our talents have helped us embrace change will help our listeners understand how maybe they could tap into some of their talents to help them embrace their changes. So, Sally, I'd love to start with you. Which talents do you feel have been helpful in your journey and in embracing change?
Definitely learner. So I have learner number 1, input number 4. So those two, they're hard to detangle. They really
yeah,
go hand in hand. So input wants this deep craving to know more and just learn more about, have this very strong depth of knowledge, where learner just loves the learning process. So when I started my learning journey about sobriety, I did a 21-day alcohol-free challenge, and I didn't realize. I just was like, all right, I need to take a break. I didn't realize really what I was signing up for, and it was actually a learning program. So there was like an article to read every day, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know that. And so it really lit up my learner talents for sure. This curiosity kind of peaked, and then input was like, ooh, I didn't know that. There's more that I want to learn. So I did a 30-day challenge after that. Similar, it was like video lessons, and it had this like scientific background to it. It was all about like what alcohol does to your brain and your body and your sleep and your emotions. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. Wait, it causes cancer? Wait a minute, I didn't know that. So
Wow.
yeah, there was a lot. Chad, like you said, your learner is like you don't know what you don't know.
yes,
Um, but you also can't unlearn what you've learned, right? So
yep,
the more I learned, the more I was like, ooh, this is really, not good for my brain, my body, my mental clarity, my work performance, everything. And so the longer of the break that I took, and then, that really kicked in my achiever talents. That first challenge was a 21-day challenge. And I was like, yes, I'm going to achieve this goal. And then I did a 30-day challenge. And then I had some friends that were doing it around the same time, and they were a little bit ahead of me and got to 100 days. And I was like, 100 days without alcohol? Yes, I want to try that. Like, I want to achieve. So my achiever for sure kicked in. So yeah, so I would say learner, achiever, input definitely were 3 talents that fueled my inquisitiveness and just wanting to achieve those goals.
Oh, I'm always so interested to hear my learner friends. So I am surrounded by learners. My husband's a learner. One of my best friends is a learner. Now I'm on the podcast with 2 more learners. Like, you guys are always just a breath of information. And if I ask any question, it's like backed up with the like, and here's this book and here's this article. And I'm like, hold on, just give me the answer. I'll trust you because I know you've looked it up and you've done the research for me. So I do love you all so much with your learner talents, tapping into those things. Yeah, I don't know where mine is. I'd have to
yes,
look. It's down there ways.
That's funny.
Chad, I'm sure some of that resonated with you. Do you want to share your talent journey
yeah.
with us?
So I want to share my talents, but I want to pull out a thread that I love from what Sally just said, which is this beautiful combo that you applied to your sobriety journey, but I think also has larger implications for other changes. That there are 2 pieces. There's the learner that drives the process part of it, and then the
Mm-hmm.
achiever of the, hey, we're gonna achieve, like there's a landmark or a signpost at the a
Yeah.
signpost at the end of this that we can strive toward. And I think, taking your awesome personal story, Sally, and sort of expanding that into some of the workplace challenges that we look at, I think there are some messages that some of our listeners could take away of like, okay, who are the people that can help you with the process of making the change? And then also, who are who are in your team that can help you celebrate the achievement of the change, or sort of that the mile marker of, oh, we've now made this change. Because one of the other things we know is that change is always ongoing. It's always around us. Just because we've hit one change doesn't mean that's the end of it. And I think that this is where the other place where learner and achiever can kind of cycle with each other. But there are other talents that could probably tap into that. I'm sure, Jen, I'm thinking of your activator, starting a change. So you've got people that are starting, then the process, then the achievers at the end. I think of some of our futuristic and strategic minded friends that we've had on the show of, they have all the sort of the endpoints picked out for us. So anyway, that was one thought I was struck by as you were talking.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And I think that goes to some of the themes that I was going to highlight. Learner always gets a big shout out in this show because it is my number one. I love to hear another learner. Because Sally, you've already talked about the process. I'm going to highlight a couple that have been helpful for me, but also one that's been less helpful. And I think it's worth noting which talents might get in the way of embracing change. So the ones that are helpful are, and I picked from a little further down in my top 10, connectedness, discipline, and arranger. And so the connectedness kind of sees all the parts, like, okay, sort of why is this change happening? What are the implications? Sort of connecting those dots. Our friend of the show, Jess Cowan, has done a great job of explaining what connectedness looks like. But I think seeing all the pieces, for me, that connectedness starts to get tapped into. But the discipline and arranger, I like routine. I like knowing where the pieces are going to land. I like to know what the future plan is. So if I can help the change happen by putting some structure around it, great. If somebody can explain to me the reason, and this goes to my analytical a little bit, but also what the end puzzle piece is going to look like, I'm far more likely to understand the change. Now, I mentioned that there's one that's a little less helpful, and that's my deliberative. Because, and this, Jen's cracking up. I love it because she and I share that. And it's I can often carry a very pessimistic viewpoint when it comes to change. And I see the hurdles. I may not always communicate that I see them, or that if we tackle this hurdle or this obstacle, that may actually help us have a better chance of succeeding at the change. So anyway, it's
but it's
one
not
of those
always
things.
Welcomed, right? Like when you call out those hurdles, then everybody's like,
Right.
okay, negative Nelly, like calm yourself down, like just get on board. Yeah. And we need to ask those questions. Yeah.
Yes. And I think one of the places where, we've talked a lot about this on the show, of sort of the double-edged sword, is it can be really helpful in assessing potential dangers to the change. But if, as you just pointed out, Jen, if people aren't willing to listen to those dangers, then it becomes harder for me personally to accept the change. And also, I'm almost looking for it not to fail. That sounds very pessimistic, but I start to okay, I'm going to start keeping my ears and eyes open for, I told you so. Like, hey, you did listen to me. And so I would just say it sometimes is a less than helpful. Sometimes I need to dial down the deliberative in terms of embracing that change, and just being really aware of where that dial is super helpful. So those are the ones I can want to contribute. Jen, I know you come to this with a very different set. I know you and I share deliberative and responsibility, but beyond that, you have a whole other set that I don't.
Yes. Well, so I love that you're talking about the deliberative part, because I do think that that's where, if I'm not on board, my deliberative will punch holes in everything, and I may be guilty of hoping it fails because you guys didn't listen to me when I told you like this stuff was going to happen. I told you so are such crappy words to say, but your brain is like singing it. I told you so, and you didn't listen. Okay, so for me personally, like talking about this like rapid change that I actually thrive for. If one thing is going to change, let's let all the things change at the same time. I had to spend some time, because I was thinking of in preparation for this, I was thinking about, I'm like, why do I do that? Why do I embrace that? Why is that okay to go from like, oh, let's just have one thing change to like, nope, let's have everything change? Because if we're going to mess up one thing, why do I do that? And I kind of fell onto some kind of a few big things about this. Before I do though, I really think that changes from others, if they tap into my belief, I'm on board. Okay, so that's where my number 3 of belief, like if they tap into the why, if they give me a good enough compelling why, I'm on board. For me, it doesn't take much. Like I've already decided what's important to me. So obviously like, okay, we're changing everything at once. My activator, my achiever, and my adaptability, I would say are where this comes from the most. The movement, my activator loves the movement, the full upheaval, the quick action. My achiever loves that challenge. Like that's one of the things I read in my report. Like you love challenges. You don't sky away from them. You charge head on into the challenge. And so I think that's that achiever activator blend that makes that happen. And I think it's like, especially with all these other things that I had, it's a never ending to-do list. Like there is never nothing that needs to be done. There's no time I'm like, oh, I'm going to twiddle my thumbs. I don't know what I should do next. There's lots and lots of things to do. And my adaptability, I think it makes it really easy for me to just take things as they come. I am a very in the moment person. Like I think we've shared on other episodes, my futuristic, we talked about that already, is at the bottom. It's at 33. My context, I think, is like 31 or 30, something around there. So don't look back. Don't look forward. Just be in today is essentially my thinking pattern, is definitely like being in the moment. So I do think it just helps me respond to what's most important in the moment. Because I am so heavily executing minded, I do think my adaptability blends to that executing in that way. And then I do think that every single decision I make, I filter through my deliberative to weigh that risk. And so I won't say that always has my deliberative stopped my activator from starting a bunch of things that maybe I should have done these in different pieces and not all at the same time. But my achiever and activator figured that out. And I think honestly, my responsibility is keeping those things that are most important top of mind, because it's not going to let me let the balls drop, right? And every single piece of it is grounded in my belief. Like my belief is definitely like, I wouldn't have started it. I wouldn't have even stepped out like a little toe into this if I wasn't fully invested already, and that the why really spoke to me. So I think that's how my blend of that was 6 of my top 7.
Wow.
Chad, am I doing the next one or no? I think I am, right? Yeah. Did you have anything to add to my nonsense of my activator?
No. What I really found interesting about what Sally you shared and Jen what you shared, going back to that start, the process, and then the finish, was that Jen, you were really putting a real good focus on, in the present moment, how is this change impacting me, or how in this moment am I making a slight change, but very present based. And I think sometimes a lot of the change initiatives that, even when I was in higher ed, and higher ed moves at a slightly different pace, a little slower pace than a lot of other, more corporate change initiatives happen. But that there's that process of moving along and then taking that change of what is the impact of this change on me today and what will it be maybe tomorrow. And I think there was some overlap between what you were saying and then the process side that Sally and I were talking about, like, what can we learn today that makes this better? Or what can we learn and share that makes this change a little easier? That was just
really
something that
curious.
starts.
No, I love that. And I'm really curious, Sally, about your futuristic, because it's in there in your top 5. Like, how does that work with your, like, I'm thinking your achiever and a futuristic probably love this blend.
Yeah, well, it is obviously it's very future oriented, so it can see that kind of brighter future. What's funny about my sobriety journey is that I wasn't looking to get sober. I didn't have like this big rock bottom moment and oh, I need to clean up my act or anything like that. It was just kind of a steady realization that alcohol was taking more than it was giving. And so my futuristic didn't work for me because it didn't see sobriety as like a long-term goal. It didn't see that as my
Interesting.
long-term kind of longer-term plan.
Yeah.
I call myself on my website accidentally sober because like my achiever just kicked in. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I do 21 days and then 30 days and then 100 days. And then it was like, well, if I got to 100, I should get to 200. And then a year is like right around the corner from that.
Yeah.
Um, so my futuristic, like now it can see long-term sobriety as like my grand plan, but like back in
Yeah.
the early days, it was really a hindrance. It
Wow.
didn't see that
Hmm.
as like the long-term plan at all. Kind of worked against me in those early days because I was like, no, sober, like that's not what I'm doing here. I'm just taking a break.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And just
so
achieving along the way. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right.
Well, what I find interesting, Sally, and please don't let me speak to your journey, but what I'm hearing from the outside is that it's almost like your learner helped kind of kickstart your futuristic,
Mm-hmm.
or that it
Totally.
was the inroad that,
Sounds like
oh, I'm just going to learn about what it is to be sober, or what it is, what is doing to my body. And it was the process that kind of was the ramp to the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
wow.
I just that struck me because I was thinking about, okay, this awesome, personal story. What does that also mean for some of our teams or organizations that we work with? Like, how could you tap into sort of the process of change as sort of that on ramp to your future vision? Or can you get
Yeah.
started by just engaging with the small pieces of the process to then
Right.
build into the future that you want? And so, again, I don't want to, I'm not trying to
Oh,
take
I
your
love
story.
that.
I was trying to
Yeah.
unpack it a little bit, like, what's the lesson here? What can we take away and maybe apply it at a grander scale? And if I'm wrong, please call me out on it. But it was just something,
No,
a thread I was hearing from the transition from learner to futuristic, and kind of kickstarting it, almost like a jumper cable that you would, see in a car,
yeah.
like learner jump started the futuristic.
Yeah, I think it's so important also like when we talked a little bit earlier about that ADKAR process and like the desire building the desire and the
Yeah.
knowledge and the ability. That knowledge and ability like taps right into the learning process. You have to be able to understand what the change is that you're being expected to, as a leader
Yes.
if you're trying to implement change or as an individual contributor if you're trying to adopt the change, just understanding the process of what does the change look like, what am I going to be expected to do, will they teach me how to do it, how am I going to learn how this process works, and what does
Right.
success look like, right? So
Yeah.
that is, for those with learner or just kind of that more process oriented, that can be super helpful with embracing change and really adopting change in the workplace for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking of like when as you were talking about that on ramp to it things too, I was thinking like, well, if you are process oriented, how easy that could help like that side of our deliberative. Well, if we know there's a process involved and they've given us enough information because your learner keeps pulling on that, like give me more information, I could see where it's easier to get on board and adopt the change as we go, not being able to necessarily see the future as maybe a positive place, but even if we know, like that there's a process involved, like it can help us get past some of those deliberatives that might be trying to like that talent's going to kind of hold us back, or futuristic is like I don't see a clear good future in this, like we're not going there yet. But that process, like being in the moment and continuing to like pick up the information and do the next thing, as my achiever likes to say, we're going to do the next
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that was really working in their way through too. Oh, I'm loving this conversation. So I want to like pivot a little bit because you started to talk about the individual contributors, and I'm thinking about like my group would talk about those like not seen and heard, and Chad already talked about it a little bit with the deliberative, and like if you're being ignored in this place, and maybe for this topic it's more like this person who's embracing this or trying to go through this change, or is up against a challenge with this change, maybe they feel more alone. than not necessarily unseen or unheard, but I think those kind of go hand in hand. So I'm feeling like it's really important to understand our own personal perspective in that moment, like how the change affects me personally. I'm curious, Sally, what like tips you might have for someone who is struggling to embrace that change, and then also maybe feels alone, or maybe is pushed aside a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really important to tie back to the why behind the change.
Yeah.
And it's not just my belief number 7. I know, Jen, you talked about your belief talents
Yep.
and wanting to understand the why. But from a workplace perspective, as an individual contributor, it is important to understand the why behind an organizational change and like what's going on big picture wise. So from if you're a leader that's trying to implement change, helping your employees understand the why behind the change, what's the impact, what's the reason, that's super important. And then for the individual contributor, really kind of diving into understanding, okay, well, they want me to do this, it's different than what I'm used to, it's different than what I'm accustomed to or what I enjoy doing, and why am I being asked to do this?
Yeah.
To do whatever the change is. Why are they asking me to do this? There's got to be some bigger reason than just for the heck of it, right?
Right.
So I think that's probably the biggest piece of maybe advice or suggestion is try to anchor
Dig
on
into
that
that why.
why. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
of course my belief loves that you took it to the why, and I'm feeling too like it's then connecting what we're going through in the moment. Like we know that this change is going to happen, and then if they tell us the why, and even if it's compelling, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be something that we're going to like full on
Right.
embrace. But if we can like take the time to like sit in the what am I losing in this? Like, what are my real feelings about this change that's happening? And then, I mean, I don't have to give anybody permission, but I feel like it's okay. Like I should tell you, it's okay to feel resistance to change. It's okay to feel a little stuck, powerless, or afraid, but it's this place where I'm hoping that then we can invite these people to ask questions and get clarity. If someone isn't giving them a compelling why, and maybe that why isn't your why.
Yeah.
I always talk about like my why might be different than the business is we're going to make more money, but my why doesn't care whether this business makes more money. It cares about, like in the one I used earlier, I'm losing my private office. And so now I'm going to be wide open, out in the open with my team. What is my why? What makes that important to me? Chad, I'm curious, like you've got to have something to add to this as well.
Yeah. So, as I was thinking about this whole conversation, I work with some teams where you do have sort of that outlier of, maybe being a little resistant to coaching or making a team change or, changing some of the dynamics. And so I went and did a little research on this, and it's interesting that we're bringing up the why, which is, very much that belief and sort of who we are at the core, because it also taps into the value of emotion. And one of the stats that I thought might be pertinent to this conversation is that 70% of decision making is usually based in emotion and only 30% in rational thought.
Mm.
So as much as Sally and I have talked about sort of the rational process of learning things and adopting, new information in our lives and new processes or whatever, a lot of that uh, process is also driven by emotion and
Yep.
what's engaging to us. What do we feel is positive? What do we feel is negative? And so we come to somebody that might be a little resistant or feeling alone. You may actually be better off if you're the leader, say trying to get that person on board. um, Speak to what the emotional load is. What are they feeling? What are they losing? I love that you keep bringing that up, Jen, of, what's the emotional attachment they have to an office or a process or something they created that is now no longer maybe serving the organization, but they are really proud of it. And so yes, there's a rational reason. Hey, the ROI on that project is not what we want it to be, but I built it. That's a
Right.
valid emotion that you're going to need to talk about and bring up. especially for somebody that's kind of feeling on the sideline already, and feeling a little bit alone. So going and understanding the emotional tie, and also what themes are driving that. It's, oh, I don't have an emotional tie to that future that you're painting for us, or I do have an emotional tie to something that's maybe based in context, that there's a history here, and I have a history with this program, or I have a history with this initiative, or this location. You were talking about locations. I have an emotional tie to this place. This is where I started. I don't want to move to the new office. So just understand that emotional piece, I think, is really important when we think about particularly the people that might be sitting a little bit on this sort of the sideline, or might be feeling a little bit alone. So that would just be my piece in that.
Thank you. Yeah, completely resonate. That completely resonates with me. Having that activator, it is emotional. This is an emotional response. They talk about the influencing talents being more emotional than relationship building talents, because it's an action out of emotion. We are influencing others. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before, but when I heard it, it was like groundbreaking to me, because I was like, oh yeah, actually, some of the people I know who have really high influencing talents, especially like all in their top 5, they are a powerhouse of emotion, and just what they're thinking and feeling in the moment. Whereas those who are relationship building are much more comforting in a different kind of like emotional state. It's much more level than us with like influencing talents and our top. So I only have 2 in my top 10. So I can't say that that's like completely me, but I do know with my belief in my activator, we're just adding fire to this like emotion. I really liked, you guys both had pinned into this between the why and then the like what might be holding us to that old way, and like being afraid of losing that whatever it is that we're losing, is that the other person's reason, the reason for this change might not necessarily like mesh with you. And so it's okay to find your own reason for this change that needs to happen. So if you don't see it right away, like keep digging. How can this change that's going to happen, whether I want it to or not, how can this change positively affect me in my life? And then keep looking so that you can start to embrace more of those positive aspects and then navigate through some of those negative ones. That was my last piece on this.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, is there anything else that we've brought up that you are resonating with, or think that you'd love to like expand on? Because I was seeing a very thoughtful face. For those of you watching the video, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it looked like you had something to add there, and I want to make sure I make space for it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it's important, like Jen, in the story that you were sharing, right? I think it's really important to realize that, when people are going through change, they are losing something.
Yeah.
And that's a process in and of itself, that it may require, a grieving type of process of what you're losing and what you're going through. And especially for managers, trying to coach their employees through change, just understanding, that big life change of, Jen, to use your example of going from an office to a cubicle and open space,
Right.
like that's a big change in someone's work environment, right? So that kind of, the grieving of losing. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that piece of the change model, is that there is a loss before the new thing becomes the new way of doing business.
And the sad thing is, in that example that I was sharing too, that loss of a private office to go to a cubicle was way more emotional than physical, because it actually told them they lost status. They didn't. Their title didn't change. Their roles and responsibilities didn't change. They put this person more in contact with their team. Like, they might only have actually seen their team when they would leave their office to go and find them somewhere within the 4 buildings. But like, now they had their team right there at their fingertips. I mean, like, could probably reach out and touch them. They weren't that small, but they were very close. But somehow that like they felt a demotion
Yeah.
in that sense. And I think that's the part that when we deal with change, I don't think anyone realizes like it's not just physical, like they lost an office. It was very emotional in that
Yeah.
time. So I love the thread we're pulling on with the managers and like helping the team see the or like understanding those perspectives of what your team members are going through too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's great that we're touching on managers because that was actually going to be one of the big questions I had for this conversation, and I'm going to come to you, Sally, with this first. Given that we're talking about managers, and I'm thinking particularly new managers that are, they've experienced their own recent change, they're embracing the change of a promotion, but then maybe they've been put in that role to help drive a larger team organizational change. I'm just wondering if there might be two or three key pieces of advice that you would offer to those new managers, things that maybe you've seen be successful in navigating and embracing that change, particularly as they're taking on their own personal new change of being a new leader.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts, comments, talents that you've seen. I don't know where you want to go with that, but I wanted to put it on the table.
Yeah, I guess where my brain goes is back to that ADKAR model of building the awareness for change, and new managers need to over communicate with their employees, especially in a new manager role, right? So that awareness is that first step in ADKAR, and just building the reason, the why, the business impact, how it'll impact the employees, like just the whole reason behind that, and I think is probably the most important. Um, and then the last step in ADKAR is reinforcement. So like as the team is going through these changes, don't forget to the attaboy, the good job, the hey, you did this really well. Hey, look at the impact that we're making. Like help them see the big picture is also maybe part of the advice. So understanding the reason, the why, and the big picture, tie it back to the impact on the business, on the company, on the organization, and really the big picture of why it is that the who the company is serving, the customers, the clients, et cetera, whatever the purpose of the business is. But tying it back to the purpose, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And having that purpose, like that leads me into that going back to that step, that awareness, knowing that your team is likely all going to have respond differently to this, like being able to keep that space for them so that you can hear what their concerns are, because whether or not they're going to change anything about what we're doing with this change based on someone's concerns, it at least gives you as the manager a place to be like, okay, these are their specific concerns, and now how can I use my talents? And as coaches, I think we all regularly help leaders learn to use their talents to build trust, to create hope. We know those two are the big ones right now. And actually, it sounds like hope has surpassed trust even in this, which I was like, how does that even happen? That we're needing more hope than we are building trust. But being compassionate to hear and understand some of their concerns, and then just that providing that stability, like you said, showing the framework, I think is so important. I think my big one, and maybe because I'm typically this person when it comes to someone saying, okay, this is the change we're going to do, find your early adopters and lean on them to help you, like either get the word out to others, help explain what's happening for the rest of the team. I think, in all honesty, I think activators are just natural early adopters.
Yes.
They like to get started. So if you have an activator who also is like, you could really tap into their why right away, they're going to be right with you, and like they're just going to be like ready to move this ship forward. Hopefully you as the manager can like meet all those other needs that your followers have while your early adopters are helping you kind of move everyone forward in this along the process.
Yeah, Jen, if I could just add on to that, I really love how you brought in Gallup's science around the 4 needs of followers, creating hope, providing stability, building trust, and creating compassion. And I think those are just so important, especially as a new manager. New managers might not have those tools in their toolkit, but just knowing those 4 key things are super important for building an effective team and for helping them leading through change, right? So just building an effective and high performance team, those 4 components are just so important. I love how you brought that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
It's interesting, the threads that the two of you have brought up tie into the main, I'd say 2, maybe 3. It will 2 key points that I wanted to bring up. We've talked about sort of the awareness of why the change needs to happen. So you're essentially starting to develop a story, right? So a narrative. There's a couple pieces, and we'll link to these in the show notes. But there's some great pieces from Gallup around the importance of shaping narratives. So that kind of rationale. This is the story. This is the reason why this change is happening. And so for a new manager, and this I would say also expands to any manager, but how do you shape the narrative based on the theme that you're speaking to? So somebody coming to me with my high analytical, I need a data-informed story, a data-informed narrative.
Yep.
This is where our stats are right now. This is where we need them to be. To get there, we're going to need to make this change. Okay, so if you start to base it for me in data, that tells me a story. Okay, but somebody like somebody with connectedness really high, like our friend Jess Cowan that I was mentioning before, maybe you need to show the thread of impact. That old analogy of the butterflies and the hurricanes. Butterfly flaps its wings over here, you get a hurricane over there. So what's the narrative that you can show? Oh, we're going to make this small change, but it's going to have this really big, massive impact. And I want to show that to you so that you can see all the connected dots, the process that we've talked a little bit about in some of the other ones. And then maybe you're talking to somebody with individualization. So personalize the message for them about what's the impact on you, what's the impact on the next person that they sit next to or their closest working colleague, but really sort of what gets better for them as part of the change process. So you need to modify the narrative based on who you're talking to, and again, this comes back to knowing your team, which I think is a broad thread that we've touched on in a couple of our more recent episodes. So that's one. And then I also think what themes can help you kind of translate the change initiatives? So somebody with, say, communication, putting the change in words that your team resonates with. So is there a particular lingo or jargon that your team is really used to, but maybe the change is being talked about in a very different way? How can you tap into whether you have communication or maybe a teammate has that? How can you translate that change into language? Or somebody like woo, you're talking with somebody with woo, how can you, this goes to your early adopters point, how can you win them over early,
right?
To see this as a good thing? And then they can be, whether it's Activate or whether it's woo, they're the early adopters that then spread the message. And then also thinking about analytical again, how can you measure the benefit of the change? So how do you translate the change to who that person is and what the impact on them is going to be? So I think those would be the 2 key ones: is translate and make sure you've got a narrative. And that goes, I love that you brought up I hope I'm saying it right, ADKAR, AKAR.
ADKAR, ADKAR.
Sorry. Thank you.
The desire. Don't forget the desire piece.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for calling that out.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the narrative, the desire to go on the journey. When you started bringing that up, I started thinking about like storybooks. Once upon a time, we're in this place, and then you're gonna eventually go to this other place, and that process, that journey, is the change. So anyway, thank you very much for calling me out on missing the D.
No worries.
and building that desire.
Desire is definitely an important step in there that we can't miss, or we're not going to get very far with everyone.
So you've spent a wonderful, I think, almost 45 minutes with us. As we think about just sort of wrapping up, or any big thoughts that you've had as we've had this conversation, is there anything you'd particularly like to highlight? Or maybe there's an idea that maybe one of our questions didn't necessarily nail on, but you want to make sure you share with our listeners. I'd love to invite you to share any other big ideas that you think might be helpful to our audience in terms of embracing change?
In terms of embracing change, well, I would just offer, if anyone is sober curious and interested in, just exploring what a life without alcohol or just drinking a little less, then please reach out. I would be happy to, have a conversation, an exploratory conversation. Like I said, I was accidentally sober. I didn't start out to have this path be my own, but it started with just a little bit of curiosity. So I would just encourage people to reach out and ask good questions.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you,
But
Sally.
no, other than that, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Great.
and to Sally's, call out, we will definitely have her contact information
Yes.
in our show notes, and you'll be able to reach out to Sally, and if that's a journey you want to go on. As with any of this, if you are a team or leader going through change, any of us stand ready to help you. All of our contact information will be in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But I think with that, I'd just like to say thank you, Sally. This has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate a lot of your thoughts. I love connecting with a fellow learner, as even though Jen gives me a hard time about it on occasion. But this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. For our listeners, as always, I'm going to keep encouraging you to play to your strengths.
And be uniquely you.
If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts.